Welcome, 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 my Be Health Empowered family, on this powerful and meaningful Martin Luther King Day. Thank you for joining us here on Excuse Me, Doctor. My name is Dr. Melissa Clark. Of course, please call me Dr. Mel, and I'm wishing everyone in our audience an inspiring and powerful Dr. King Day. We saw in the introduction those moving words and those words that were said over 50 years ago by Dr. King, which still ring true today about violence. And we chose those because that's the theme of our show tonight. I want to thank everybody for joining us. If you're watching us, whatever platform you're watching us on, welcome. But if you're watching us on Facebook, please hit that like button. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. We're so glad that you've joined us. And now, in order to create the amazing week that we always do by bringing you the health information that you need to make wise health choices for you, yourself, and your community, to do that, I have to welcome my incredible co-hosts, Miss Lila Mays and Mr. Wayne Bruce, bringing us the word on the street. How y'all doing? Come on in the studio.
Hey.
Hi.
Happy MLK Day.
Yes, yes, yes. And Wayne, we are just reading your lips.
You know, I mean, the director is I'm going to get fired. I feel like the director, I'm going to say something bad about the director. He going to fire me. It ain't cute.
I'm pretty sure on this.
Me and the director don't want me to shine. In this
I'm pretty sure on this King Day that you will get grace. So I wouldn't worry about it.
I mean, man, were those words incredible? They were said by Dr. King after John F. Kennedy was assassinated. So they were said in 1963. And here we are
all this
over 60 years later.
How amazingly timely. And I wanted to mention that, you know, tonight is a special night because we are joined in our once a month broadcast by the Howard University Research Centers and Minority Institutions Community Engagement Corps. And, you know, the purpose is to bring Howard University into the discussion with all their subject matter experts and all their reach into the community and all their incredible history of serving our community. And so we welcome Karen Parker, who is the project coordinator of the Community Engagement Research Centers and Minority Institution program at Howard University College of Medicine. Welcome, Karen. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, everyone, and happy Drum Major Day to all of you. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Well, happy to have you.
Yes.
We are definitely happy to have you.
The director is messing up my shot here. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm a little self-conscious about this whole shot thing.
All right. Well, director, while you figure that out, I'm going to say I'm going to jump into what the topic of discussion is tonight. You know, everyone, it's MLK Day. Oh, wait, Karen.
Yes.
Did you have something to share before I do that?
Well, I mean, I think that your introduction is really timely. I think that the people know what it is I do, but for those of you who don't, the Community Engagement Corps is a part of the Research Centers and Minority Institutions here at Howard. And basically what we do is make sure that the RCMI supported research here at Howard addresses what's relevant to our communities. And we also do a lot of listening, and we support programming just like this. So we're really happy to be here, and please take it back, Lila.
All right, thank you, Karen, and I'm thrilled that we get to share this space tonight. So it's MLK Day, and to honor a courageous visionary, obviously visionary with that statement he made those many years ago, leader who worked to dismantle oppressive power structures through nonviolent demonstration and confront injustice peacefully. We're going to talk about some stuff.
Yeah.
So over 50 years after his murder that resulted from gun violence, communities of color remain disproportionately impacted by gun violence.
And we know that during these 50 years since his death, homicide has been the leading cause of death for Black men aged 15 to 44. And, you know, as an emergency physician, this topic is really near to my heart because I've literally cared for hundreds of people who've been the victims of gun violence and probably thousands whose families have actually lost someone to gun violence. And the statistics are really daunting. So I talked about how gun leading is a leading cause of death for Black men and boys under age 55. In 2020, though, young Black men ages 15 to 34 were 22 times more likely to be killed by a gun than their white counterparts.
Wow.
Incredible.
And it's not just men. In that same period of time, there was a 49% increase in Black women and girls who died by gun homicide, again, compared to 2019. And also young Black women ages 15 to 24 are over 6 times more likely to be murdered by firearm than their white counterparts.
Wow.
And also young Hispanic women are nearly 2 times more likely to be murdered by firearm than their white counterparts. So the numbers speak for themselves.
Wow. Well, MLK Day, we're talking about gun violence. So your girl in the streets got out and talked to some people who were actually at the MLK parade and around the city. You know, we asked them what they thought. Let's get into that, Mr. Director.
What y'all think?
How do you think Dr. King would respond to gun violence, mass shootings, that kind of thing?
I think that he would respond the same way in which he did back then, you know, because this is one of the things that he was fighting for. It was equality, it was for peace, you know, and so with the presence of gun violence means the absence of peace. And so we can't have peace and gun violence, although there's some people living peaceful, but how peaceful can you really live when there are people taking other people's lives? So it's like now the value of humanity has decreased because now you can get killed for cutting someone off in traffic or for giving someone cold French fries. And so because I too know the effects of being on the other side of someone's life being taken, I have 2 brothers who were killed by gun violence, and it was just hateful, you know. What makes another person take another person's life, you know? So we just gotta keep fighting and spread the love of God, because where love of God is, why is hate present, you know? So yeah.
He's against violence, period. Don't forget that taught us non-violence opposition. And so he's always been against violence of any kind. And unfortunately, he was violently killed and assassinated. And so he knows, even where he is now, that these are difficult times that we're confronting with. He wants us to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk and do what he taught us to do.
So what's so interesting about the people on the street is the young lady was actually a part of the parade. Her mom was walking with the ceasefire group, just randomly ran into her. And then obviously Auntie Maxine always has a sound bite. And so I know that was kind of difficult to hear, but she was saying, this is what Dr. King was really teaching us was nonviolence. And so he would certainly have an opinion about mass shootings and gun violence today. And so she was saying, we have to do our part now that he has been taken away by gun violence.
Well, that was just amazing that you not only ran into a young woman who had been affected by gun violence, by both her brothers being killed. She touched on one of the things we're going to talk about is what happens to people who've been affected by gun violence. But you honestly ran into Representative Maxine Waters, Auntie Maxine. That was amazing.
Only
and
in California.
I think
only
in California,
right? Run into run into Maxine, Representative Waters on the street.
Yeah.
Right.
That's fantastic.
Well, I think that's an amazing way to just launch us into our discussion tonight about talking about gun violence as a health issue, not an issue of criminality. And we're going to talk about not just the causes, but also the solutions from a public health perspective with our two incredible guests. Karen, if you would please introduce Brother Farrakhan for us. We're just honored to have him here tonight.
It's my pleasure and honor to do so. Thank you. So coming up, we have Brother Al-Malik Farrakhan. I want to call him Elder Al-Malik Farrakhan. He's such a font of wisdom. He is the founder and executive director of an organization here in the Washington, D.C. area called Cease Fire, Don't Smoke the Brothers and Sisters. It's known for its hands-on outreach to both youth and returning citizens. And he's been a griot and a peace warrior for over 50 years. He's called the godfather of the peace movement. And his work began during his 21-year incarceration and just spread nationwide. He also wants me to point out that he has no relation to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Please welcome Brother Al-Malik Farrakhan.
Welcome, yes, Brother Farrakhan.
Assalamu alaikum. How's everybody doing?
Alaikum salam.
Doing great, doing
when
great.
When I said I had no relation, right, blood relation to Minister Farrakhan, he is my spiritual teacher. Yes, ma'am. So I just want to
stand corrected. Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right.
Well, we are overjoyed to have you, and we are also overjoyed to have Dr. Roger Mitchell, who is currently the Chief Medical Officer of the Howard University Practice Plan, and most importantly for this discussion, the Director of the Howard University Center on Trauma and Violence Prevention. He previously was the Chief Medical Examiner for Washington, D.C., and also the former Deputy Mayor for Public Safety in the city. Welcome, Dr. Mitchell. We are delighted to have you.
Dr. Mel, it's great to be here. Finally, I made it to excuse me, doctor. I've been waiting for, a couple months now to get my time on the show. So I finally made it. So I'm excited.
Hey, everything happens in the right time. And today is the right time because you are two perfect guests to have to help us honor Dr. Martin Luther King with this really important title and topic around violence and gun violence happening in the African-American community. And we talked about the stats up front. So I just want to go first to Brother Farrakhan to see what, in your opinion, is at the root of the rise in gun violence in our communities and some of the statistics that we started off with.
Well, about 27 years ago, we gave out different statistics, but it was basically something similar to the rise of the gun violence that's here today, right? I personally believe that this is manufactured and playing on people who have lack of love for self and kind. And looking at, if you look at the comics, if you look at YouTube, if you look at American history, how when Al Capone, Dutch Schultz, and all them did it, they called that folk heroism. And they dined with kings and queens and presidents. And today we have a tendency to simulate that what we see. Go back 30 years ago, we wasn't doing all that to ourselves like that. And yes, we had gangs and things of that nature. You had to manufacture zip guns and things of that nature. Now today, guns are in our neighborhood that was banned in Vietnam. They say that was inhumane. But the question is, how do they get into our neighborhood? We don't make no bullets. We don't make no weapons.
Right, right. Well, it's, as you said, the glorification of gun violence and the question of how did the guns and the bullets get to us in the first place? And so, Dr. Mitchell, can you pick up there? What do you think? Especially, with the various hats that you've worn, what is the root of the rise in gun violence in the African American community?
Well, I mean, it's majority of gun violence that happens in our community is happening as a function of a lack of access. And so, we the reason why we call it a public health issue is largely because public health gives us the opportunity to look at the entire problem. W.E.B. Du Bois talks about the 5 areas of policy and 5 areas of access that affects our community, and that's education, economics, housing, healthcare, and criminal justice. I would add a 6th, which is environmental justice. And when there's a lack of access, lack of equity in those areas, then that lack of access will show itself up as violence of one way or another, whether it's interpersonal violence that we're seeing, domestic violence, child abuse, elder abuse and neglect. All forms of violence finds themselves in the suffering of lack, and the root of that lack, often in most communities of color, is institutional structural racism. And so to have this conversation on the day we commemorate the birth and life of Martin Luther King Jr., we still are today fighting directly the effects of racism, but also fighting the lingering effects of structural racism as well. And so I know we'll talk more about it, but I think there's no real simple answer to why violence is and how violence affects our community. But at the end of the day, equity and access is at its core.
Absolutely.
Brother Farrakhan, if I may, the organization Ceasefire, Don't Smoke the Brothers and Sisters, I understand that it's critical to one-on-one outreach and mentoring and violence interruption. Could you describe for us what specifically your organization does and what its track record for results is?
Well, there's so many different functions that deals with ceasefire, right? We have a unique track record that we're one of the only in the country that took 5 different gangs into the office of the mayor, which happened to be Mayor Berry, and declared a ceasefire back in 1995. And those brothers and sisters had never ever went back beefing with one another again. Matter of fact, they turned their lives around and gone back to the street to help others recognize that we're not one another's enemy. And I was hoping that I could have got up ceasefire tonight and not got stuck in here, because I would have showed you some documents and things if we had the time to. Or I would like to invite you up, and then you can meet some of the brothers and sisters themselves that's been out there. We had one of the greatest peace squads in the city that we dealt with the whole city. And this is before there was any money that was on the table for violent prevention. We went from our heart. And these were gang members that I'm talking about. We took 50 different gang members and marched all over the city before we went to the office of Marienburg. These were gang members that said ceasefire. That's never been done before. We've had a lot of marches since, right? But it's never been done by those that was the ones that was committing the act of binding.
So Brother Farrakhan, you know, in the introduction, Karen mentioned that you had been incarcerated for 21 years. How does the experience that you have as an incarcerated person, how did that inform what you chose to do and how you chose to go about working on this issue of gun violence and working with the gangs and the incredible results that you had been able to get?
First of all, sis, that was not in my plan. I was an escaped convict and I went across the country, New York, California, and et cetera, and et cetera. And they say God catch you wherever you're at. And the damnedest place that I put my guns down was in Los Angeles, California.
Wow.
Where the Crips and the Bloods, where drive-by shootings were going on every day. And me, I met Mr. Jim Brown, which was an idol of mine, but this was way before he started the Mariah Kent, right? And I, you know, like my great-grandmother was a slave. She was 114, right in Washington, D.C., jet black. Looked like Harry Tubman, smoked a little pipe, the whole shot. Ain't stand no taller than 4 feet. But she used to tell me about slavery. And I guess it was embedded in me, right? You know, I've always wanted to be a play guy, a lover. But the guys wanted me to be a gangster. So I wound up living those dual lives like that. But I ran into some other brothers that took me into the Nation of Islam. And that's where I changed my life at.
Wow.
That's where I began to recognize that we are not one another's enemy. And to love for my brother and sister what I love for myself. But I was also trying to prove my innocence, that what they locked me up for, that I wasn't guilty of. And I told the judge, I'm not doing this time. And you know it ain't my beef. And I was serious about it. And I went across country and in New York City and et cetera. And I'd run the gangs everywhere because I used to be a gang leader here myself. So I can recognize the culture. And there it was. And doing that, I run into some magnificent giants of Black men and Black women that helped fashion and change my life, besides the Honorable Master Elijah Muhammad and Minister Farrakhan, like Mr. Herb Belafonte, who sacrificed the last 40-some of his years working for gang members.
Wow.
That's what I'm saying. Working
I don't think most
gang
people know that. Yeah.
Huh?
I don't think most people know that.
No, they didn't. But Maxine know. Miss Waters, she know. Right? Matter of fact, I just left her when we just had this thing for the Honorable Jim Brown out in LA. Right? That she had called for, along with some of the brothers and sisters from Mariah Kent that Jim Brown has started. Yes.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing this.
Incredible.
Sharing that, because I think it helps us to understand how your understanding about the fact that we are not each other's enemies led you to be able to lead others to that realization?
No, it's wild. Since they, unbeknown to most of y'all on there, your doctors, you probably say, how the hell is that possible? But the sheriff's department, they paralyzed me in LA, right? When I came home in a wheelchair.
Wow.
2002, Minister Farrakhan touched my legs over at Union Temple in front of 1,800 people.
Wow.
He said a prayer in Arabic. I didn't know the prayer. What are you saying? He said, I merely asked Allah to bless Malik to have the use of his legs again because he was going to need the wheelchair. And everybody said no to him needing the wheelchair and yes to me. But 3.5 years later, right? 3 months later, I started getting feelings that I hadn't felt in years run through my body, my toes and everything. But
Wow.
3.5 years later, I'm standing up on crutches and braces. And I get a phone call from Minister Gadir, the regional minister that's here. And he said, Malik, are you sitting or standing? Normally when somebody asks you that question, there's bad news coming with it. And I don't know why I lied to him, but I told him I was sitting, but I was standing. And he said, Minister Farrakhan is in the wheelchair. And man, I fell straight back. Them braces, you got to unlock the back of them before your legs can bend.
Right.
Bam!
Wow.
That
that sounds like an amazing recovery. And it's just, I think, an amazing part of your story and your saga, and one of the things that probably makes you as powerful and as effective as you've been, because one of the next things we want to transition to is to ask Dr. Mitchell to go back to that piece that he mentioned around institutional racism,
right,
and talk about that as a part of what we're seeing now in those statistics that we talked about up front, and what role that institutional racism plays in the gun violence that we're seeing.
Well, I'm sitting here smiling because, I'm a student of our good brother, Al-Malik Farrakhan, and sat with him, and his request for you to come and sit with him and see all of the writings and see the pictures of when he started the work, when he was in his wheelchair, and then when he came out. I'm smiling because of the kudos to you, Dr. Mel, and your team of having an intergenerational conversation. A lot of the time, the voice of our elders gets lost in our new way of thinking, and thinking that we have all of the answers. And so to have his voice in this space and now memorialized forever in this recording is to me fantastic. And it is one of the things that strikes down structural racism, is ensuring that we have a memory of those things that have happened before us, and we don't forget the things and the struggle of our past. And I think that's what a lot of us have forgotten, is that we believe that we're so far removed from racism and the effects of racism because now we can own houses and we can own cars. It's funny, my father's in the hospital right now recovering from a stroke, and he said to me, he was watching TV, he said, oh my, he shook his head, he said, oh my goodness. And I said, what, Dad? He said, they got black people with shorts on TV. I never thought I would see a day where black people could wear shorts on TV. That type of legacy of understanding the type of work that we've had to do, and that's from my father, who's still here. right? And the stories of our elders. And so structural and institutional racism is a peculiar institution in that it has been built to create a fear that we have of ourselves, which is the most heinous of its effects, is that we actually are scared of one another, and that we actually believe the narrative of the less thanness that has been given to us. And so it pits those of us that may have education against those of us that don't, those of us that may have a little bit of money against those of us that don't, those of us that may have a little bit of a station in life and a title against those of us that don't. And it perpetuates itself because even those of us that have been able to create some modicum of success, we actually think we're successful without the success of all of us. And there was never a time when we would, in the past, think that we would be successful without the entire community. And so in cities like this one, in Washington, D.C., all over the country, there is a moving in of different people that aren't historically part of community. And so we lose community with the gentrification of community, because your neighbor doesn't have a vested interest in the success of the person next to him because they just got there 3 years ago. And that really doesn't matter whether or not that neighbor is African American or Asian or white. It's really a function of a social strata, and that happens. That's a function of the history of slavery, and the history of racism, because there was always a time where you had to create lines to move community away from community, and the so-called redlining. And so structural and institutional racism is based in a perpetuation of a lack of access. And so we know that particularly in medicine, my grandfather was graduated Howard Medical School in 1932, was one of the first Black physicians in New Jersey. And there are more Black men graduating medical school at that time than there are today. We know, Dr. Mel, there was a report called the Flexner Report that dismantled Black medical schools at the turn of the century and only left two, Meharry and Howard. And so we wonder why we don't have Black physicians, Black male physicians in particular, are at a loss. And we know that the studies have shown that there are better outcomes, patient outcomes, for those patients that have a physician that looks like them. And so that's why medical schools like Howard University are extremely important in our goal to increase our class sizes because we produce the most Black physicians in the country, but it's not enough. And so, there's talking about the effects of structural racism and its lead to violence is like boiling the ocean. It's very, very difficult to do. But I stutter because I call him Pop when we're not on TV. But brother Farrakhan, what he expressed is this lack of love, is a lack of seeing each other as the same, is really at its core. And that's why when we turn to government to try to solve violence in our community, we'll lose, because government doesn't know how to love like community knows how to love. But when we turn to community and say, community, let's love each other, and community so busy trying to make money and so busy trying to be busy, that it's so difficult for us to turn to community, because community just wants to talk about decreasing violence. Community just wants to pontificate about decreasing violence. But the question becomes, how many of our listeners and your watchers actually are working with young people, are actually mentoring? One of the biggest things, and I'll stop here, is the literature, right? Because y'all fancy MDs like me want to hear about the literature, right? So the literature talks about the most impactful violence prevention constructs are those that mirror surrogate family structures. So surrogate family structures is a big word for mentorship. And mentorship is a big word for I can rely on you because you love me and I love you back. And I know that without mentorship, I wouldn't be here. Without mentorship in surrogate family structures or true family structures. Surrogate family structures are needed for those that don't have the necessary true family structure. And I'm sorry, I like the true family structure of a father, a mother, and the kids, right? And so those family structures become imprinting upon individuals so that they can become productive and see where their boundaries are and see where their history is. And if they're raised by their grandmothers or they're raised by their, other consistent caring adults, that's what decreases violence, even though risk is in the lack of access. So not everybody that's poor is going to be violent. But if you're poor and you don't have consistent family and you don't have job and you don't have education, then your risk strata continues to go up. And that's David Satcher's work in this youth violence work. So I think that's important. And I'll stop there.
So yeah, I was going to jump in there because I know Dr. MEL has a lot of questions. So brethren, I'm going to ask y'all to limit your answers to 2 minutes. Amen. All right.
I know 2 minutes right there.
And I know that's hard to do with such a weighty topic, but I think one of the things that you said about all those factors do all tie back to institutional racism, because the lack of opportunity ties back to that. And so I'm going to turn it over to Karen. I know that you have some really burning questions.
I do, and I'm kind of intrigued by what you said, Dr. Mitchell, about the fact that we can't necessarily turn to government when, in fact, it would seem, I don't want to speak in counter to you, but it would seem that there are certain things that we need beyond community in order to create greater opportunity. You spoke about jobs and just the ability to function in the society in which we've chosen to live. That is somewhat outside of community. I'd like to turn it back to Brother Farrakhan. Are you seeing certain community interventions that have made the most difference in decreasing this gun violence, especially in our area?
Let me go here.
Okay.
When the violence was up to 475, 500, we was called the murder capital. We brought that number back down to below 100. I think it was around 80 something. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, we get an elected attorney general, right? Which was a person that I respect very well, which is called Rasheen. But he made a terrible mistake when he brought other people into this city and undercurrent violence and others that had no knowledge about this city. But to tell the men and women that's been putting in the work, that brought that number down, that they need to do it this way, that way. That was a part of government, but they used a brother and a sister that needed a job like I might have needed a job to bring that message that might have been living out in that life themselves at a certain time. There's nobody that can come from outside of this city and straighten this city up. Washington, D.C. is totally unique. I don't care whether the men or women are in the service or wherever they are. So it's going to come from here. And it was coming from here until they divided the city up. And when they divided the city up, they divided the city up with men and women that really didn't have the resources, and some that did have the knowledge of what to do couldn't do it because they was held by restraints and restraints that they couldn't step outside of. As Dr. Mitchell had said, they had to do it the way government wanted done. I did everything outside of the box. And that's why we've been so successful.
When you say outside of the box, what do you mean?
Thank you. I was going to ask the same thing.
I'm glad that you said that. And that was one of Mr. Harry B., Mr. Belafonte's favorite words, think outside the box, right? When I came home, I come home in a wheelchair. As I stated, a lot of these babies, they didn't know me. They didn't know what my reputation was prior to. But they seen and they heard the sincerity in me coming to them with a message. But the message was basically me showing them how to do it. Not looking down on them or things of that nature, but show them, right? Not by running your mouth, but being out there in the front. I brought these great men that I just spoke of, and some of these great women that these young brothers, include myself, never thought nowhere in the world that I would ever met them. And set them down at the feet of them and gave them some of them jewels. But most of all, these were peewees, babies. These are my sons and my daughters that I put in a bad position. Because we started the gunplay back in the 60s.
Okay.
Right. So really, it sounds like, you know, that one-on-one, that mentorship, that loving, that role modeling, that being on the ground and being a part of the community is essential. But Dr. Mitchell, I want to take it back to you to talk about gun violence as a public health issue, because it does cause disability. It does cause changes in the brain. It does cause, you know, from the increased amounts of stress that people who are exposed to it have, it does take away productivity and potentially lead to loss of life. So framing it as a public health issue, what does that allow us to do more than thinking of it as an issue of criminality, which we're sort of led to think by the news media and others?
Well, I appreciate that question. It's a long question.
Uh-oh.
I think we lost your audio.
I think you muted yourself, Dr. Mitchell.
No, yeah, there you go.
There we go.
There we go.
Yep.
So I apologize for that. One of the things that is important to point out, and I'm going to just talk about the government piece again real quick. Let me not make a mistake to suggest that government doesn't have a role in violence prevention. Absolutely. Government makes violence prevention friendly, right? So access to education, economics, government should be working to improve and then remove barriers to access. And so that's important. And government, you know, we spent a lot of time. I was in government. I was the chief medical examiner, ended up being the interim deputy mayor. And we worked hard in government to make it so that community could be successful and try to get government out the way a bit and provide those resources. So that's important. That's first. The second piece is as it relates to the public health approach. Yes, you know, here we have a level 1 trauma center here at Howard University. There's level 1 trauma centers all over the country. And it's important to understand how gun violence leads to decreased productivity from individuals that have suffered from gun violence, how it leads to trauma, not just trauma on the body, but mental trauma. And that mental trauma is not just affects the individual, but it'll affect the community, the children. Some of your listeners may be aware of adverse childhood experiences Centers for Disease Control study, and several others have looked at the effects of adverse childhood experiences on future health conditions like cardiovascular disease or obesity. And so it's extremely important for us to look at a public health issue, because it not only affects the individual, but it can affect the family, not only the family, but the community. And it does have long-term effects. And if we can decrease violence, a single source of violence, then there's work that can be done to decrease the effects of that violence on the entire community, both health and otherwise. You talked a little bit about epigenetics and the effects of trauma downstream. You can even inherit your downstream effects of violence, right? We know that it has effects on our chromosomes and on our telomeres, to get a little bit more technical. But so violence has its effects. But let me put it this way also: the Centers for Disease Control and the NIH just started getting funding for violence prevention, for gun violence prevention research. You see the placard over my left shoulder that says gun research gun violence. It's because for years, for over 26 years, there was no monies being made available at the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institute of Health to study gun violence. And now there's just a modicum, a small amount of gun violence research dollars present today.
So is there anything else on your wish list, Dr. Mitchell, in terms of what can be done and how we can shift the focus to address these surges?
Well, I think that we have to, coming out of COVID, prior to COVID, there was a lot of resources that were made available to young people, and public resources. And we haven't gotten back to that. We still haven't gotten back to your public recs working with young people, full-fledged mentoring with young people, engaging with young people. We've spent a lot of time here in DC working the 20 to 30-year-olds. And we've seen a decrease in those violent acts of those individuals. But what happened is that it was replaced by some of the younger folk. And we didn't wrap our arms around the younger folk that came behind the 20 or 30-year-olds that had been doing the work, but we spent programming money to get them into jobs and such. And so now there has to be a comprehensive approach. We really have to create that. So what does that look like? Every major jurisdiction in this country needs to be spending burden of disease dollars on violence prevention. And to Brother Farrakhan's point, those dollars cannot just be going to the academics and the researchers. Those dollars have to be going to violence intervention, prevention programming, and it has to go into community-based work. Community-based work that's led by the best work of the community. So the community knows what community needs better than anyone else. And it's sometimes very difficult, because if you can write a really good grant and you can provide really good data to the government, then the government will often pick those programs. But some of the programs that are operating out of people's homes that are showing that surrogate family structure love, that might not be able to write a grant or might not be able to give the data that can show what has happened, becomes difficult for those truly effective community members to get the resources that they need to continue to do what they're doing for that small group of shooters, because there's really only a small group of individuals that are keeping every city hostage.
And I, what you said about the 25 to 30-year-olds is amazing, because in national statistics, what you said is exactly true. In certain age groups, gun violence has gone down, but in teenagers, it's actually gone up. And so, Brother Farrakhan, I'm wondering, what is the call to action for our audience in how they think about gun violence? What can they advocate for? How can they be involved?
Well, there's a lot of people that want to get out there and help. Some want to do it in revenge because they lost a loved one and what have you. right? I see you have to get with persons of like minds, like myself. I just didn't do what I did by myself. I made connections with people, young brothers and young sisters. I asked them, what did they see that could help them get out of the condition that they were? And then I went about putting that into motion for them, making that happen, which is giving them access, have responsibility for self and kind. And Doc said it real well. We left the peewees out. Most of the peewees that's out there committing this come from the rock cocaine. They raised they self, right? Now you got the peewees up under them that really don't have no direction. And that's where we come into play. You know, when they say that an old timer can't speak to a young person, that is cold-blooded foolishness. So anybody listening that believes that, they want a father figure. That those that didn't have one, those that came up with just some mother, they want that father figure to give them that love and that knowledge of how they can escape this parallel of what's going on, which is a part of the Willie Lynch syndrome.
Yeah. So we're in a lightning round of just questions for here on out, and we had some questions that are online from our online viewers. We want to thank them for coming out today, and we have a question from, I believe it's Eric Vicks. What do we do to address the issues surrounding those for whom violence is a way of life? Some feel that they have to be violent for various reasons.
Brother Farrakhan, you want to take that one? Lightning round?
Yeah, it goes back to, I hate my hair. I hate my nose. I hate my eyes, my lips, right? And added with no jobs, no opportunities, it's easy to get a gun or a knife and say, I'm going to kill that end because of the self-hate. Once we begin to teach them the true knowledge of who they are, that they're not killers, that they're true warriors, and that we're not one another's enemy. And this is where my success has been at. I don't know about with nobody else, right? But how by teaching who you are. Once you get a man and woman to recognize who they are, that they're great kings and queens, man, they come from out of that thing.
Yes, they do.
Knowledge of self. Okay.
Lila, what you got?
Yeah. How do we make families whole who have been impacted by gun violence, whether they were a victim or their family members were victims? What do we do?
Dr. Mitchell?
That's for both. Yeah, Dr. Mitchell, you can jump in there.
Yeah. Well, we need to make space for them, right? So we need to call it out. We need to call it out and make space for them. And that space, is in community, and we need to make sure that we're saying, hey, if you've lost a loved one or you've been impacted for violence, and then make those things that can help and heal them available. So once they've spoken and they've been able to tell their truth and tell their story, then what's available in mental health and trauma support? What's available to them for housing? What's available for them for jobs? Because invariably the families that are affected by violence, and what's their outlet, right? And so giving them an outlet and a support system is absolutely important.
Thank you. Some more online, Wayne? You have some more online questions?
Dr. Mel, if I could do one last one?
Yeah, go ahead. One last one.
Jet Black DC says, how do we obtain funding for those like Mr. Malik to help their movement? there aren't many places uptown for the youth to grow and build. And so for those in the audience who are across the nation and across the world, uptown is the northwest section of of our city, and where I grew up in Petworth. I'm just saying.
Yes, sir. Well, who's the question to?
Oh, why don't you take it, Brother Farrakhan?
Well, I want to say thank you, Jet Black. Appreciate you. But as you know, we take and get money from the community, from the work that we have been doing, and it has no strings attached. Not that we won't take money from government, but we will, but we're very skeptical. The Honorable Vincent Orange, when he was in the office, it didn't even really know us, but knew about our program. Gave us $500,000. When Robert Bob came to the city up under Anthony Williams, first thing he said, man, you that guy, Al-Malik Farrakhan. And I thought he was getting ready to arrest me or something. Right? No, I'm just joking. And he said, man, I heard about you all the way out to Oakland. Have you been promised anything? I said, man, we've been promised the world. But we're going to make this happen if it don't happen. He said, let me check into it. We wound up getting $1 million, right? And put this money to work. Hired over 40 ex-prisoners, gangbangers, and etc. They making $25 an hour in the whole shot. You feel me? But the most important part of it, they seen that somebody was willing to give them a shot, right? They talk about a returning citizen. I don't call myself no returning citizen. I call myself an ex-prisoner, a prisoner of war, because I did illegal activities, but to help build a nation, right? But a citizen is one who's supposed to enjoy all equal rights and opportunities up under the law of the land, the government that they're under. And when a man or woman done their time, they don't get that.
Well,
so they set up.
Yeah. So Brother Farrakhan, thank you so much. And I'm glad that you meant the 1.5 million that you mentioned. I want people to understand that you've been doing what you've been doing for over 30, 40 years. So that really is a drop in the bucket. And we really hope that, through thinking of gun violence as a public health issue, by marrying policy and government efforts with the love of the community and the important one-on-one mentorship work that you're doing, and everything that academics and researchers like Dr. Mitchell can add to the equation, that we really will enter into the beloved community where we can move towards loving one another and having peace in our streets. I just want to thank you all so much for being on. I want to thank Karen Parker from Howard University Research Centers and Minority Institutions. So glad to co-host with you. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Thank you, Brother Farrakhan, for your wisdom. And of course, to my wonderful co-hosts, Lila Mays and Wayne Bruce. You all are awesome. To my audience, the Be Health Empowered family, thank you so much for joining. Have a peaceful and powerful rest of your Dr. Martin Luther King holiday. And until we see you again, remember, be wise, be well, and be health empowered. Thanks for joining.
Peace and love.
Every now and then I wonder what I want them to say. Tell them not to mention that I have a Nobel Peace Prize. That isn't important. Tell them not to mention that I have 300 or 400 other awards. That's not important. Tell them not to mention where I went to school. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want you to say that day that I tried to be right on the war question. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try to feed the hungry. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try in my life to clothe those who were naked. I want you to say on that day that I did try in my life to visit those who were in prison. I want you to say that I tried to love and serve humanity. Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice.